Disc 3.
Step 5. Why not in front of the children? Letting the little ones play their part. You're having my baby. Paul Anka, you're having my baby. I believe the children are the future. Whitney Houston, the greatest love of all. Did you think I would leave you crying? Rolf Harris, Two Little Boys. Many warring couples say that they stay together for the children. Despite huge rows and open hostility between partners, they hang on together for the sake of the little ones. I think this is a great idea, and I for one heartily recommend it. It is my considered opinion that we underestimate children and the extent to which they wrap themselves up in their own little childlike worlds, oblivious to what's going on around them. I would go further than that and urge you to include them. In a house becalmed in the eerie silence of a post-row lull, who better to ferry notes between the tight-lipped warring parties? That's right, the kids. Make it fun. Write your notes on coloured paper and send the children around the house on their trikes and bikes like couriers. Footnote. Ironically, Dr. David Cowley, in his paper Broken Home, Broken Child, states that a high percentage of children from homes in which both parents are not present will often find themselves working in low-level manual work, such as couriers, in later life. Scuttling around the hallway on their skateboards and roller skates, just like their heroes in the Starlight Express. This makes them feel involved and part of the peacemaking process, like scaled-down Kofi Annans. If, like most children nowadays, they love to watch the soap operas, then they'll know only too well that family life is no bed of roses, and that loud, aggressive, upsetting arguments are part and parcel of the rough and tumble of the day-to-day. By seeing you and your loved one fighting, it'll make them feel like they're in Emmerdale, or better still, EastEnders, something every child dreams of. There are steps you and your loved one can take to help your little smashers along the way with this fantasy. 1. As you argue, shout, "Leave it out," in a loud, aggressive Cockney manner. 2. When the row is over, tell the children that it's sorted, again in a loud, aggressive Cockney manner. They love it. 3. Why not rig up a video camera and let the children film your rows? In this age of Big Brother and celebrity driving school, it'll make them feel like they're working in the world of television and maybe point them in the right direction for a future career. Also, should things reach the courts, you'll both have a reliable record of who said what to whom. Bang, everyone's happy. It's a dog's life. When a relationship goes south, by which I mean goes wrong, as opposed to relocating to Cornwall, which can in fact be beneficial to a relationship on many levels, not least in terms of an all-round healthier lifestyle and easy access to a wide range of organically grown farmhouse produce. It's assumed that high on the list of casualties will be the kids or children. As adults, we are told to protect our children from being exposed to things that we feel might harm them. Things that we remember from our own childhood, that we suspect hindered our own progress. I'm not so sure. Allow me to challenge conventional wisdom once again. Case study. In this particular case study, we will examine the story of a randomly chosen individual, Person A. Person A, a kind and loving father from Wales, spent a lot of time with his little smashers, R and A, trying to steer them away from any examples of cruelty to animals, for fear of it having an ill effect on their young, impressionable psyches. As a child himself, he had the misfortune to witness the dreadful sight of a demented dog spinning round and round, chasing his own tail. It was at Gareth Morris's house one Easter for his 13th birthday party, and all the children were in the garden with their eggs. Gareth thought it would be funny to put chocolate on Bodie's tail and see what happened. Bodie, a border collie named after Lewis Collins's cocksure detective in ITV's answer to Starsky and Hutch, The Professionals, was recovering from a recent stomach operation for dogs and still slightly woozy from the anaesthetic, but somehow managed to actually catch his own tail. I know. In normal circumstances, This would have been cause for celebration, but not this time. The anaesthetic still present in his dog body meant that Bodie had no feeling in his farthest extremity, and so proceeded to eat his own tail. It was a sickening, outrageous act, and one that has stayed with Person A well into adulthood. To this day, he is still unable to stroke a dog any further than the midsection of his or her back. I'm sorry to say that the same is true of cats. Of course, Gareth Morris thought it was hilarious and rolled around on the grass in hysterics. His mother, though, took a different view, and in a beautifully judged act of diplomacy, cancelled a planned game of pin the tail on the donkey in protest. Gareth's response to this was to go berserk. He swept his outstretched arms across the dinner table, sending a huge homemade raspberry trifle crashing to the floor, and then had to be forcibly restrained by his older brother Lee, assuming the paternal role in the absence of their dad, still at the vet's with the injured Bodie. Gareth was later diagnosed as having attention deficit disorder, or ADD, and was prescribed the controversial drug Ritalin, which had no effect whatsoever. If anything, he became even more antisocial, and within a year his parents had split up. Gareth went and lived with his father in Newport, while Lee stayed with his mother and her sister. Then, on his 16th birthday, Gareth announced that he was gay. I know, unbelievable. This was terribly upsetting for his father, Ray, who had always been very Welsh, and wasted no time in throwing Gareth out of the house. A terrible chain of events that started with an upsetting image of an animal in distress. Only a fool would suggest that events were related, but I think there could be a link. The point I'm making is that for a young mind to witness animal cruelty can be very upsetting, but that needn't be a bad thing. What better way to grow up into sensitive, animal-friendly men than to witness extreme acts of gore at a young age? Case Study 2. In another example, Person A and his ex-wife, although they were married at the time, happily so as far as he was concerned, once took their little smashers to a zoo in Mallorca. It was a baking hot day, with little or no shade, and they trudged wearily around, peering into dusty enclosures at the poor, skinny, undernourished creatures inside. People make a great fuss about the awful conditions in continental zoos, and I think they're right. The cafe at this one was outdoor. The drinks came out of a box, not a fridge, and we had to sit with our food under direct sunlight as the only shade was taken up by a small group of Spanish youths who, despite the heat, had their hoods up and their jeans halfway down their bottoms. They, Person A and his wife, had almost finished their tour when not Person A, but the child of Person A, whose name just happens to start with A, let's call him Alan, made a beeline for the monkeys, running as fast as his little sunburned legs could carry him. He eventually stopped dead, just short of the cage, and stood transfixed. When his parents finally caught up with him, they were shocked to see that the little monkey was actually masturbating. By little monkey, I mean the simian creature in the cage. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon. They arrived just at the moment of climax. Little A had witnessed it all, while R just caught the tail end. It was appalling. But, and it's a big but, the incident has in no way impaired their enjoyment of our simian cousins. They still get a kick out of King Louis as he exposes counterfeit monkey Baloo the bear in Rudyard Kipling's wonderful animation The Jungle Book. They experience no Vietnam-style flashback horrors when playing at the park on monkey bars. And I'm told that modern director and partner of Helena Bonham Carter, Tim Burton's reimagining of the classic Planet of the Apes is rarely out of the DVD player. So, if a frenetic, cannibalistic dog and a self-pleasuring monkey do no harm, then believe me, seeing Mum and Dad enduring 3 months of silence, exchanging poisonous glances, shouting at each other, running up the stairs in tears, throwing crockery at each other, hurling clothes out of a bedroom window, and charging at each other with cutlery, is barely going to make a scratch on their young, tender psyches. If anything, it'll toughen them up. And 3 cheers for that. All together now, sorted! The Great Divide. The problems of maintaining a healthy male-female relationship are as perplexing and relevant today as they've ever been. It's an issue that has vexed society from the outset. The sexes seem destined to be forever at odds with each other. My friend Paul Lucas put it nicely when he said that probably, when man invented fire, a woman straightaway complained it was too hot. A bit unfair, but it does illustrate the point in an accessible way through the use of humour. In all honesty, it's quite tame coming from Paul. He's had terrible luck with the ladies and harbours quite a grudge. I said that to him once, that he harboured quite a grudge, and quick as a flash he snapped back, "I haven't got a boat." Ouch. That sort of quick-fire humour is perfect on a show like Have I Got News for You, or the slightly ruder They Think It's All Over Now. But in an intimate relationship, it can cause offence and hurt. There aren't many women who can put up with that kind of ribbing on a daily basis. Gabby Roslin springs to mind, but even she's gone quiet lately. The thing is that when it comes to men and women, we're just different. It's as simple as that. As the author John Gray says in his book, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, men are from Mars, women are from Venus. And while he doesn't mean for us to take that literally, he does make the point that we have our differences, although the distance doesn't have to be that great. In John's case, interplanetary, for differences to emerge. My friends David Price and Gillian Cole had one of the worst marriages on record, going at each other hammer and tongs, often in front of friends, until finally divorcing just before Christmas last year. Their families were heartbroken, and the small dry cleaning business they had built up had to be sold off. They didn't hail from two different planets. They came from Porthcawl and Bridgend, respectively, two South Wales towns in very close proximity and well served by local transport links. So be warned, coming from the same area is no guarantee of a long, happy marriage. In many cases, it can make it worse. One of the problems with David and Gillian was David's endless probing of his wife and her moods. He was constantly asking her how she was feeling, etc., and this got on her pip no end. As she herself once said to me at the famous Halloween party of 2001, an evening memorable for many things, not least Nicola Ball arriving dressed as Michael Jackson from his Thriller period. As Gillian said to me, "Keith, I wish he'd stop. If he doesn't, then I don't see any future for this marriage." I took that as a sign that all was not well in the marriage, and time has, regrettably, proven me right. The lesson to be learned is that there is nothing to be gained from poking and prodding your partner, trying to understand them. For men, this is a pointless task, so don't bother trying to understand your lady. It's like trying to predict the tides. What are you talking about? Communication let me down. Spandau Ballet, Communication. So sang Tony Hadley and his friends in Spandau Ballet way back in February of 1983. It's as strong a message now as it was then. Time has done nothing to diminish its impact. Communication can let us down, from poor reception on a mobile phone to a basic lack of understanding between men and women or gay couples. It's vitally important that we communicate clearly if we are to thrive. As always, it's not what you say, but how you say it that matters. Hadley understood this. So did those other musical firebrands, the Fun Boy 3, when they enlisted the help of the Bananarama in February of 1982 for their hit, It Ain't What You Do, It's the Way That You Do It. It's not what we say, it's how we say it. So come on, smile. That's right, it's as simple as that. A smile can make all the difference. When Glasgow, a city for years associated with deprivation, drunkenness and random acts of violence, was made European City of Culture in 1990, their slogan was Glasgow's Miles Better. Try saying that. Glasgow's Miles Better. That's right. It sounds a bit like Glasgow smiles better, doesn't it? In an instant, sweeping away the enduring image of Glasgow as a hotbed of urban deprivation, organised crime and alcohol and drug-related problems. In its place came a lovely image of a whole Scottish city smiling. While on one level it wasn't fooling anyone, it did nonetheless send out a strong message of happiness, and soon, when we thought of Glasgow, we thought of smiles. Och aye. A doctor friend of mine once informed me that it takes 43 muscles to frown, but only 17 to smile. Incredible! Medical proof that it's harder to feel sad than it is to feel happy. Yet very few people know just how powerful a smile can be. As we look around us, with the exception of female weather presenters like the lovely Sian Lloyd, smiles can be hard to come by. That's a shame, because in the right hands, or mouths, a smile can be a potent tool. Politicians know this. We are very fortunate in Great Britain to have in Tony Blair a Prime Minister with one of the nicest smiles this country has ever seen. And across the pond, George W. Bush always manages a little grin, even on the gravest of occasions. His "we'll smoke 'em out" speech could have been very upsetting were it not for that infectious, cheeky, and in many ways almost inappropriate little smirk that's never far from his Texan lips. When that other George Michael, was told he was gay, he didn't hide himself away, wrapped up with guilt and shame. Instead, he went on the Parkinson show with a spring in his step and a huge smile on his face, like the cat that's got the cream, and duly confounded his critics. As he himself would say, "I think that's amazing." Footnote. Amazing, George Michael, from the CD Patience, Sony Music UK, 505-4022-000. Parental guidance, explicit lyrics. While on the show, George performed a lovely live version of A Different Corner, which is available on the CD of his hit single As, the Stevie Wonder song, performed here as a duet with songstress Mary J. Blige. It all shows the power of the smile. Let's try an experiment. Experiment. Auntie Jean has died. Oh, Auntie Jean has died. A terrible statement, awful, shocking. The last thing any of us wanted to hear. We don't know the cause of her death, and it doesn't matter. We know that she's dead, and that's enough. It's bad news. But wait a minute. What if Auntie Jean had been suffering from a terrible disease for many years, unable to interact with her family and loved ones, ending up just a drain, physically, financially and emotionally, on her long-suffering duty-bound family? Then maybe, just maybe, her death would be a blessed relief. Still news, but now good news. You might even say it with a smile. Have a try. Imagine that Auntie Jean has died, and that you're telling the assembled family who are waiting, huddled around a vending machine in the hospital corridor, the news. First, try it with a straight face. After me. Auntie Jean has died. Not very nice at all, is it? Now, try it with a smile. After me. Auntie Jean has died. That's it. Auntie Jean has died. What did you notice? Exactly. It doesn't seem so bad. Now then, if a smile can add an element of fun to the death of a much-loved family member, then just think what it can do in ordinary, everyday life, how it can make things better. In other words, Frank Sinatra, Fly Me to the Moon. In April of 1983, F.R. David said, "Words don't come easy." And he had a point, although I think he would have been more on the button if he'd said, "The right words don't come easy." Words, after all, are all around us, everywhere we look. Indeed, only 2 years earlier, the Tom Tom Club, in wordy rapping hood, said, or rapped, "Eat your words, but don't go..." I can't rap. "Eat your words, but don't go hungry. Words have always nearly hung me." The Tom Tom Club showed an eerie understanding of the potency of language. They knew the awesome power of words and how they can help to lift or lower our spirits depending on how we choose to choose them. For example, Elsewhere in this recording, I analyse suicide rates in the UK. It's not easy to listen to, I readily admit. I labelled the charts I compiled thus: UK suicide rates. It was direct, to the point, functional, stark almost. To borrow from one of my favourite TV adverts, it did exactly what it says on the tin. In choosing that label, though, I may have lost some listeners who felt that it was a subject on which they didn't wish to dwell. All right, that's fine. It would be odd if it were any different. If the thought of the UK's suicide rates got you all fired up. As strange as it may seem, there are people like that. I once saw a documentary on Bravo about a man who could only make love if he thought about taking his own life. So hey-ho, horses for courses. Indeed, later that night on Bravo +1, so technically it had first been broadcast an hour earlier, was a documentary along a similar theme about a man and his horse. Appalling. Anyway, a little later in the section, I referred to suicide as doing something silly, a very common saying, a phrase that we're all familiar with. Now then, what if I labelled my chart that way? What effect might it have had? Let's try. Doing something silly since 1990. Scotland, 17% increase. Northern Ireland, 10% increase, and so on. Do you see what's happened? It's turned around 360 degrees. It's still the same information, the same savage indictment of mental health in Blair's Britain, but it's much more accessible, almost appealing, and it's all happened by simply choosing different words. So what has this got to do with relationships? Everything. It has everything to do with relationships, and it doesn't matter whether you're a heterosexual or a homosexual, gay or straight, whichever side of the coin you fall on, you have to communicate. I'm bored. Many modern couples, when asked why they had an affair or split up, say, I was bored. Personally, I'm never bored. There's always something to look at. Life is a big book and I can't put it down. But just because I'm never bored, it doesn't mean that I can't appreciate what it's like for people that are. It isn't nice. But what do we mean by bored? Well, for me, it's quite difficult to put it into words. If pushed, I suppose I would say that it's a general lack of interest in what's going on around me, a listlessness coupled with a lack of energy, a sort of lethargy combined with a feeling of the grass being greener in the other man's garden and a creeping sense of depression. Sometimes it's almost a physical ache that saps the very life force from your veins and pulls you down deeper and deeper until you feel the earth closing in around you and filling your ears and mouth with dirt and worms. Now this is fine if it's just something in yourself. But what if it's your partner? Disaster. For a relationship to flourish, we must always be checking on our partners and making sure they're not bored. There are many ways to do this. Speaking personally, during my marriage I was rarely bored, and for that I have to thank my wife, Marion. When I was lucky enough to be at home with my little smashers, Marion made sure that I had plenty to do, in the form of little notes left around the home. You may have read about this kind of thing before. Sweet nothings written on scented sheets of coloured paper pledging eternal love, declarations of undying devotion, that sort of thing. But not Marion. She's a practical woman and knew only too well that that sort of note would only leave me moping and pining for her. If anything, it would make me miss her more. No, she would leave little jobs to be done round the house, ironing, hoovering, window cleaning, that sort of thing. Put that together with looking after 2 growing boys, and I simply didn't have time to be bored. So what can you do to keep the travelling salesman of boredom away from the front door of your partner's mind? Footnote? That's nice, isn't it? I think the writing is coming on leaps and bounds as this audiobook progresses. There are many ways to keep your partner amused. Here are 3. Poetry. Write her a poem. Read her a poem. Silly notes. Flowers. But what about you? Why don't you compile your own list? Go on, it's a bit of fun. Look around you. If you're feeling bored and a little sorry for yourself, one of the best things to do is to go back to bed, pull the covers right over your head, and wait for the feeling to pass. Fine. But what if you're not at home or near a bed? Don't worry, there are other ways. A good trick in this situation is to think of someone worse off than you. I always think of Peter Hughes, a boy I was at school with in Cardiff. He was an unfortunate-looking fellow with red hair and thick milk bottle-style glasses that he was always pushing back up the bridge of his nose like Ronnie.Corbett. Unlike Ronnie, though, people tended to laugh at Peter and not with him, which was a shame, as he was basically a good boy who was unfortunate enough to be afflicted with both red hair and diabetes. In fact, that's what they used to call him in school. Diabetes, Di being short for David in Welsh, and purely by chance, also Peter's middle name. Peter's school days were a misery, as Phil McLennan, one of the McLennan brothers, constantly picked on him. Both of the brothers, though they weren't big in a physical sense, were certainly tough and were feared throughout the school. This is often the case. Look at Tom Cruise. I'm not saying Tom Cruise was a bully. Peter would wince whenever one of them came near. Then one day, he just cracked, and in a scene reminiscent of Sylvester Stallone in First Blood, lashed out in anger, stabbing McLennan with his insulin injection. Actually, thinking about it, this predates First Blood by about 4 or 5 years. Peter was ahead of his time. All the boys cheered as Phil hit the floor, writhing around in agony, and Peter was hoisted shoulder high, arms aloft, punching the air, again like Sylvester Stallone, this time in Rocky II. Suddenly, though, the mood changed. One of the other boys was checking on Phil and found that he had stopped breathing. Horror filled the air as we realized what had happened. Peter had killed Phil McLennan. As we all rushed to see for ourselves, Peter fell from the shoulders of the boy who was carrying him, Alan Whitby, and in doing so broke his wrist on the hard playground floor. Again, these were the dark days before wood chippings. The whole thing went to court, and it looked like Peter would be sent to prison, again like Sylvester Stallone, only this time in lockup with Donald Sutherland, 1989. But it was found that Peter was too young to be tried for murder, and so he walked free. Right or wrong? I'm not going to sit in judgment, but I will say I think it's wrong. There were no winners in the whole affair. Andrew McLennan had to adjust to life without his beloved and violent brother, while the Hughes family were forced to move to Neath. Incidentally, while we're on the subject of insulin injections, it's interesting to note that you are no longer allowed to take injections onto aeroplanes for fear of them being used as weapons in this terrorist age. I think this is sensible. After all, it stands to reason that a certain percentage of terrorists must be diabetic. By which I don't mean it's a job requirement. I'm not saying that they turn up for the interview and are told, "Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Al-Fazad, but your blood sugar levels are perfectly normal. I'm afraid we've got nothing for you at the moment. Try Hezbollah." Of course I'm not. But equally, what if it's one of the goodies, one of the Americans who's diabetic, and goes to use his insulin injection to overpower a terrorist, not realizing that the terrorist himself is also diabetic, and in stabbing him, inadvertently boosts his strength? You'd be kicking yourself. It's a minefield, an absolute minefield. One thing shines through the minefield, and that is this. There's always someone worse off than you. Always. And if there isn't, then you can comfort yourself with the knowledge that someone else is gaining strength and comfort from looking at you and thinking that at least there's someone worse off than them. For after all, without a loser, there can be no winners. My dad's a hero. My dad's a superhero. Finally, when it comes to the little smashers, all parents, and particularly dads, want to be a hero in the eyes of their child. This is perfectly understandable, but how can we achieve it? Especially if the dad in question isn't residing at the same domicile, not my words, the words of the court. You can't fight City Hall? Hoo-ha! It can be difficult to impress your heroic qualities from the other end of the motorway. Difficult, but not impossible. Here are some easy-to-follow suggestions of ways to appear heroic to your children. Is it a bird? Is it a plane? No, it's Dad. 1. If you wear glasses, follow the example of Clark Kent, aka Superman, and take them off when you do something difficult, like lifting a heavy box or helping to push a cow into a cattle truck. I should say this doesn't apply if driving. 2. When consuming soft drinks in the presence of the children, choose the small airline-size cans. These make your hands appear larger than they are. When you finish drinking, smile confidently, wink, and crush the can with ease. 3. If you're allowed to attend your child's birthday party, go the whole hog and dress up as a known superhero. This will subliminally reinforce the notion of heroism and is relatively easy to achieve. Most towns have a fancy dress shop. If you can't find one, try the internet. NB. Be warned. It's important to keep a check on emotions when dressed as Spider-Man or Superman. The costumes are hot and tempers can become raised. If this does happen, go and sit down somewhere on ground level to cool off. Do not, repeat, do not climb any building, tree, or crane while dressed as a superhero, particularly Batman, or you could have another Fathers for Justice debacle on your hands. When it comes to dads dressed as comic book heroes, the police are quite definite in their stance. I must say, though, that the staff at the station are a lot more pleasant than the arresting officers, who, let's face it, are under an awful lot of stress. So what have we learnt from step 5? Now I know. A confused dog can eat its own tail. George Michael is gay. We must communicate clearly. Auntie Jean has died. End of step 5. Step 6. Decree nice guy. The marriage is over, the friendship begins. Let's be friends. Bruce Springsteen, let's be friends. You're my best friend. Queen, you're my best friend. You've got a friend. James Taylor, you've got a friend. This is such an important, vital step in making divorce work, the post-marriage friendship. It's a step that many find difficult. I appreciate that, but have to say that in my own case, I have been blessed with, if anything, a better relationship with Marion now than when we were married. Why? Hard to say, although I think the distance helps. We're far less under each other's feet these days, and that can keep the freshness alive. With her in Cardiff and me in London, we seem to have found the perfect setup. The M4 motorway is a lifeline for us both, a vital artery and also an arm, inasmuch as it keeps us at arm's length. Her analogy, not mine, but I think it works. I never thought that a man could feel affection for a motorway, but I do. For me, the M4 is the yellow brick road. Why? Because it's the road that takes me to my 2 little smashers, and each time I gaily skip down it, my heart lifts. Let's be quite clear, I don't actually skip, I drive. Skipping on a motorway, even on the hard shoulder, would constitute jaywalking, and as such would rightly be considered a criminal offence. This recording in no way endorses such reckless, antisocial, and most importantly, dangerous behaviour. I've done the journey so many times now, I know it like the back of my hand. I could do it with my eyes shut. In fact, I did do it with my eyes shut once. A terrible mistake, a complete error of judgment, and something that I sorely regret. Luckily, no one was harmed. I came to a halt on the hard shoulder unscathed, and better still, undetected by the police. It was 4:30 in the morning, and they had better things to do than caution a sleepy dad. And anyway, they didn't have to. The experience was terrifying, and taught me a valuable lesson. I'm sure that there are many men, and women, although if we're being honest, it's predominantly men, who make their own joyous journey up the motorway to visit their own little smashers. It's a modern-day ritual, and I'm proud to be a part of it. This contact is vital for the dads and kids alike. Being with the children keeps you centred. It keeps your feet on the ground. I can honestly say, if I didn't have my 3 hours with them every 4 weeks, I'd be away with the fairies. The journey itself can be almost as enjoyable as the time spent with the little ones, if you know what to do. I've compiled a list of ways to enhance the trip down the motorway, what I call the daddy dash, and make it even more enjoyable. Daddy Dash do's and don'ts. Do allow plenty of time for your journey. Although most of Britain's motorways run smoothly, there are sometimes jams that can put your time back by up to 20 minutes. Don't drive drunk. Seems obvious, but look at the figures. Do make a note of places of interest along the way. Theme parks, castles, factory outlets, farms, cinema multiplexes, etc. that could prove useful once full access has been granted. Don't arrive too early. Your visiting time will be specified. Respect it. Do take presents or the cash equivalent. Don't exceed the speed limit. Do drive on the left. It's a bit of fun. As I've said, my own journey is a particularly pleasant one, taking me from the hustle, bustle and grime of London to the green leafy pastures of Cardiff. From the outset, as I approach the elevated section of the M4, my heart is pounding as I speculate on my impending meeting. I'm thinking of my little smashers, of course. Will they be pleased to see me? Will they have grown? Will they be in? My hopes soar along with the car as we climb high over Brentford and to a lesser extent Chiswick. This section of the journey always strikes me as quite glamorous. The environment has an almost Los Angeles-like quality to it. You could almost imagine Billy Joel cruising along in an open-top American car. The mighty skyscrapers wouldn't look out of place in a Spider-Man movie. One of those tall buildings is the headquarters for GlaxoSmithKline, the people that make Lemsip. Although you can't buy a Lemsip there, as I found out to my cost. A lovely chap, Leighton, the security guard, 3 months away from retirement on the day we met, as he said to me, "Keith, you're wasting my time and yours." Fair enough. Up, and away. After the Lemsip building and the Heston services, the next place of note is of course Heathrow Airport, which can be seen from the motorway as you head west. Just crane your neck to the left and there she is. Britain's busiest airport, and soon to be blessed with a 5th terminal. Heathrow is a wonderful achievement of engineering and vision. I'm not a good flyer. I can find the experience tense and anxiety-laden, though I do enjoy going to the airport. The ideal scenario for me is to drop off a friend. I park up in the short stay, help my friend with their bags. It's not always a friend, sometimes it can be the friend of a friend. Then just soak up the atmosphere of international travel. Lovely. Obviously, when I'm bombing down to Cardiff to see the kids, I don't actually stop off at the airport. That would be madness, not to mention prohibitively time-consuming. No, what I'll do then is just a quick couple of times around the perimeter fence, a friendly wave to the plane spotters, and I'm on my way. Adios, amigos. A very nice man. After Heathrow, it's plain sailing for a while. Keen royalists are in for a treat as we pass within view of Windsor Castle, scene of so many royal events over the years, while chocolate lovers will get a king-size kick as we pass Slough, home of the Mars Bar. Next up on the map is Reading, famed of course for Reading Jail, where Oscar Wilde was incarcerated in May of 1895. But that's not what interests us about Reading. Of more note to us daddy dashers are the wonderful new motorway services recently opened that straddle the M4 like a mighty colossus, providing everything the weary traveller needs. Food, drink, petrol, audiobooks, video games and instant RAC membership. I well remember one visit in the autumn of 2003 when I got chatting to the resident RAC salesman, Bob, a super Yeovil man now in his 60s. He had a lovely gimmick. His name was Robert, or Bob, Andrew Collins, RAC. He had a lot of fun with this, asking people if they wanted to join his organisation, and then, when their attention had been gained, he would explain his initials. I found it fascinating, and could listen to him until the cows came home. In fact, on one trip, I'd already stocked up on sweets and things at Heston, but still called in at Reading just to hear the story again. It was that good. A natural performer like Jimmy Nail, Bob could have whole coach parties eating out of his hand as he wove his magic. But be warned, if I've whetted your appetite for a little Bob Collins moment, he's no longer there. The last 3 times it's been a Londoner, what I call a Cockney called Steve, who, while I'm sure he's a lovely man, falls very short of Bob's standards of salesmanship and sheer charisma. I asked what had happened to Bob, and Steve said he'd been moved to the welcome break at Membury. But I've never seen him there. Bob, if you're listening to this, then obviously it would suggest that things haven't worked out with you and Joyce. That's a real shame, my friend. I never had the pleasure of meeting your good lady, but just from those few photos you showed me, I think I got a real feel of her. I can honestly say that I've never been more impressed by someone I didn't meet than by your Joyce. She was a jewel. But hey-ho, onwards and upwards. As this book shows, there is life after divorce, and it's for living. It won't be long before you find a new lady, ready to join the RAC, and it won't be roadside assistant she's looking for. No, to quote your own lovely joke on the subject, it'll be bedside assistance. Anyway, we can't linger on the breakdown of Bob's marriage. We've got to hit the road. Just around the Reading Services area, there's a man-made lake where people go jet skiing. It looks smashing, but unless you're stuck in traffic, it's unlikely that you'll get a decent look at it. If you are lucky enough to encounter a jam in this area, it's to your left as you head westbound. Some lovely scenery now as we make our way towards Wales. There are 2 more service options open to us, Membury and Lee Delamere. In their day, both were fine examples of the genre, able to hold their heads up high. But now, in this new millennium post-Reading age, they seem sadly inadequate and, unless nature's call is pressing too strongly, I recommend that you give them both a miss. Bridge over troubled water. And so we come to what for me represents the pinnacle of the journey. A chance to stand and gape in awe at man's ability to harness the elements and overcome all natural obstacles. The new Severn Crossing, aka the Severn Bridge. If you've never been, then I urge you, go. It's a real treat, and you only pay one way. Leaving Wales is free of charge, but it will cost you £4.60 to get in. That's okay. Pay once at the entrance, then all the rides are free. It's a bit of fun. Seriously, though, isn't it beautiful? A triumph of science and nature. It's been a favourite of mine since its opening on the 5th of June 1996. Yes, I was there, and is more than just a cable-stayed construction bridge. It's a wonderful spot for quiet contemplation, and its staff is friendly beyond belief. I recently parked up on the English side one evening and strolled out to the midpoint of the bridge from where the view is breathtaking. Above me, sky and the sound of seabirds. Below me, the deep and dark abyss. I'd only been out there for 10 minutes when one of the stewards came and joined me. Above all else, it was his level of courtesy and politeness that impressed me most. Wary that I was savouring a private moment of quiet contemplation, he approached me ever so quietly, so as not to disturb me. Then, when he was about 10 feet away, gently held out his hand and asked my name. Now, this level of friendliness is quite out of the ordinary nowadays, and I was momentarily lost for words. "That's all right," he said. "You don't need to talk if you don't want to." Lovely. I don't think his head for heights was quite as steady as mine, though. He was soon asking me to step away from the edge, which I did. I didn't want to make him nervous. Anyway, we strolled over the bridge together and called in at his office for a cup of tea and a biscuit, where he was much more chatty, quite the talk show host. It was like having a cup of tea with Jonathan Ross or Patrick Keelty. He wanted to know everything about me. How I was feeling in myself, how was work, who was my next of kin. We chatted for up to an hour. I even met some of his colleagues, who I'm sure had better things to do than to sit and chat to me as I filled in form after form. Before we move from the bridge, it's worth noting that it's not all fun, games and laughter. There is a dark side to the bridge, which it would be wrong to shy away from. Many have tried to take their own lives there. Most recently, of course, there was that terrible episode when one of the Stereophonics went missing. Very sad. He certainly didn't have a nice day, and the band haven't been the same since. the land of my fathers. Obviously, once you're over the bridge, it's official. You're in Wales. Welcome, welcome to Wales. It's a lovely place, and the people will waste no time in making you feel welcome. They're too busy. Not really. I would never say that. It's a bit of fun. Seriously, though, this part of the journey is something of a blur to me, as I'm roughly half an hour away from arriving at my destination. I'll make a quick stop at the Magor services to clear the car of cans and crisp packets and chocolate wrappers. I'll stand up and brush down my lap, then plug in my car vac for a quick once-over the front section of the car. The back seats are fine. They remain untouched for the duration of the journey. But the front can look like a bomb has hit it. Admittedly, a very friendly chocolate and crisp bomb, but still quite a mess nonetheless. I'll also fill up with petrol at this point, as it means that I then have a full tank for the remainder of the outward journey, as well as just about enough for the return leg. It's not too far a distance. It's a 156 miles door to door, or 312 there and back. Or, as once happened when I realised I'd left something behind just as I got back, 624 miles. That was the journey I mentioned earlier where I ended up on the hard shoulder. So, with the car looking like a new pin and with a full tank of petrol, you're ready to set off once again. Footnote: the petrol forecourt at Magor is on a slight slope. On one occasion I got out of the car a bit too quickly. This, combined with a degree of lightheadedness and nerves at the prospect of seeing my little smashers, plus a fairly oily forecourt, meant that I lost my footing. I stumbled sideways between the car and the pump and caught a glancing blow to the head as I fell. To this day I can't be sure whether it was the car or the pump with which I collided. It doesn't matter, I was out cold. I came to in a matter of minutes, but the damage was done. My confidence was dented, loose change was lost, and I had an oily print all down the right side of my trousers, which meant that on my arrival, Marion refused me entry to the house. There's not much else of interest on the journey. Between Newport and Cardiff, look out on the right side for the Celtic Manor Resort, a huge hotel with spa facilities and an enormous golf course which has attracted many top golfers from around the world, including Ronnie.Corbett. Hands across the water. And so I arrive, thanks to a simple stretch of road that has proved a lifeline in my divorce. The house itself, on the outskirts of Cardiff, is not the same one in which Marion and I shared so many happy times. It's considerably bigger. It's a lovely red brick detached building in a beautiful gated private estate, like the one O.J. Simpson lived in. It has its own driveway, which can take up to 6 cars, although I always park on the road so that Geoff's Humvee, his big American 4-wheel drive vehicle, can come and go with ease. I think they prefer it this way. In fact, I know they prefer it. Actually, that's my abiding image of Geoff, sat behind the wheel of his big, black, high-mobility, multi-purpose wheeled vehicle, and grinning like Jack Nicholson as he steers the beast, as he calls it, towards me, as I make my way carefully up the drive. To be fair to him, he always steers the other way at the last minute. That's Geoff. He's in control. I can't say enough about Geoff. When a divorce hits you, whether you're a man or a woman, but particularly when you're a man, the great worry is, who will the new partner be? Well, in Geoff, Marion hit the jackpot. And in a funny way, so did I. It's what I call a win-win situation. I'm truly blessed with her choice of man. In Geoff, she's found a real prince who has stepped in and taken over the tiller, as it were, of my marriage with the consummate ease that befits a team leader of one of this country's leading pharmaceutical companies. The ship is in good hands. This aspect of divorce, what I call getting to know your ex-partner's new partner, is once again a vital one. Let's not get caught up in it here, though, as I deal with it extensively in Step 7, Old Friends, New Friends. Getting to know your ex-partner's new partner. For now, we're more concerned with the relationship between you and your ex, how to nurture it, tend to it, and watch it grow in that difficult period after the divorce. If there are children involved, then of course you're going to have to maintain a healthy relationship with their mother. Only a fool would say otherwise. Sometimes, though, when there are no children on the scene, experts advise the divorcing parties to have nothing to do with each other once the finances are settled. This is the general opinion, endorsed the world over by leading authorities and marriage specialists. While I'm not saying they're wrong, I would never say that, I don't think they're necessarily right either. Keep in touch. Simple advice, but vital. Don't let the divorce stop you from staying in touch with someone you once loved enough to marry. You've got so much in common with them, as you have with a new partner, although again, that is covered in more detail in Step 7, Old Friends, New Friends, Getting to Know Your Ex-Partner's New Partner. You've already lost the marriage. To lose touch as well would be awful. For all you know, you could end up getting back together. I appreciate that if you're listening to this soon after the breakup, then getting back together might seem the last thing you want to do. I know that some people have very bitter breakups and come away harbouring all sorts of unpleasant thoughts about their exes. But even so, keep in touch. You don't have to look far to find examples of couples that couldn't stand each other to such an extent that they divorced, only to then go and remarry each other soon after. Here's a list. I've called it Do It Again. Melanie Griffith and Don Johnson. Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. Natalie Wood and Robert Wagner. Fair enough, that's not a very lengthy list. In all honesty, I was expecting it to be much longer. But I think my point still stands. Consider this. If Nicolas Cage and Lisa Marie Presley, Bruce Willis and Demi Moore, and Nicole Kidman and Tom Cruise were to remarry, the list would double. Also, this is just a list of celebrities that are known to have remarried each other. In the real world, it's harder to tell, as no records are kept, but surely it must happen. I knew a boy at school who went on to get married to Nicola Pearson. They divorced after 4 years, and he is now married to her sister Fran. It's not the same as marrying the same person again, but it's close. The impossible dream. As you've been listening to this step, what thoughts have been running through your mind? Have they been along the following lines? Yes, this is all making sense. Keith seems to be hitting the nail on the head.
Gosh, this is exactly how I view the world. How refreshing to encounter a kindred spirit. It's like finding a long-lost twin.
Or perhaps you're the sort of person who would react this way. For Pete's sake, what the heck is the fool talking about now? I've just about had enough. Let us, for the sake of argument, say that your reaction was closer to that last response than to the former. This is a shame, a great shame. We now live in an age when people shy away from challenges, and I can't help thinking that if some of the great British achievers of the past were suddenly to spring back to life, they would be hugely disappointed by what they saw. Isambard Kingdom Brunel, Charles Darwin, Oliver Cromwell, William Shakespeare, they would all be turning in their graves at the way modern men are prepared to drift away from their wives after a divorce. Even Winston Churchill, winner of the BBC's excellent series Great Britons, would say something like, "Are my eyes deceiving me?" For the fact of the matter is that there's no reason for you not to stay on good terms with your ex, and going on to do what the title of this step suggests, letting the friendship begin. How can this be achieved? Well, let's turn once again to our good friend Paul McKenna. In his best-selling book, the #1 bestseller Change Your Life in 7 Days includes free mind programming CD, Paul talks at some length about a technique that has served him well over the years: visualization. Visualization. It's a big word, but what exactly does it mean? Our old friend the dictionary tells us that it is a technique used to produce an image of an internal organ or other part of the body by using X-rays or other means such as magnetic resonance imaging. But this is almost certainly not what Paul is talking about. This is a medical interpretation of the word and is of no use to us here. Indeed, if you've recently lost a loved one to a disease affecting internal organs, then this brief passage will have caused you untold upset and tears, dredging up painful episodes from your recent past. For this I apologize. No, the interpretation we need is the one before. This is what Paul McKenna is talking about. A technique whereby somebody creates a vivid, positive mental picture of something, such as a desired outcome to a problem, in order to promote a sense of well-being. Bingo! It's interesting to note that although my first interpretation didn't work out, I didn't sink into a pit of despair and refuse to try again. Think of the first interpretation, therefore, as a first wife. Do you see my point? Exactly. Paul is talking about visualizing that which we want. In his book, he gives a wonderful example of something that happened to him a while ago. Over to you, Paul. One time, he says, I went into a Mercedes showroom and sat in a car to get comfortable. I smelled the leather, went for a test drive, and imagined it was my own. I took away a brochure to add to my scrapbook and imagined driving it every day. Pretty soon, my mind, this is Paul's mind, was focused upon getting me one, and I began to see Mercedes everywhere. Before long, a seeming coincidence brought a bargain deal my way, and I bought my first Mercedes. Phew, inspirational stuff, like Rocky. But would it work for the ordinary man or woman in the street, or is it only effective in the hands of a mystic? I put Paul's technique to the test and visited a local Mercedes showroom. Like Paul, I sat in the car. Like Paul, I smelled the leather. This is where things started to go wrong. With hindsight, I can see that when he talks about smelling the leather, he probably means a quick, subtle whiff. In other words, acceptable smelling. I can now see that my excessive smelling, at close range to the beautiful leather upholstery, was inappropriate, unnecessary, and worrying to the showroom staff. All credit to them, though. I was asked to vacate the premises in a firm but friendly voice, and no harm was done to my person. I bear you no ill. Undeterred, I visited another showroom, this time keeping the smelling down to an acceptable minimum. A test drive was granted with Howard, the salesman. Oh, a lovely chap, who kept me entertained with stories of his son who works in the media. And I left the showroom with a brochure and a free keyring. So far, so good. All I need now is a seeming coincidence, and the car will be mine. The scrapbook that Paul mentions is just that, a collection of pictures or articles relating to your dreams. Things that you can look at and visualize achieving while you wait for the seeming coincidence. This is a wonderful technique to employ when trying to engineer a reunion with your ex-spouse. A photograph of you. A photograph of you. A flock of seagulls. A photograph of you. Who got the camera? Ice Cube. Who got the camera? My camera never lies. Bucks Fizz. My camera never lies. We all had scrapbooks as children, cutting and pasting in bits and bobs on our heroes and heroines. If we think back, I'm sure we can all remember the fun they gave us. Well, they can be just as much fun as a grown-up. If you really want to get back with your ex, then let's take a leaf out of Paul McKenna's book and start compiling scrapbooks so that we can visualize being back together with the one we love. The scrapbook itself is easy to come by. All high street stationers stock a good range at reasonable prices. Once purchased, your next requirement is glue. If you've not bought glue for a while, let me tell you that things have moved on. It's no longer pots and brushes like they used to have on Blue Peter. Nowadays, the king of the hill is Pritt, a handy little glue in a tube, again available at most high street stationers. Now comes the hard bit, what to put in. The important thing, and really the purpose of the scrapbook, is to keep in touch, or at least feel as though you're keeping in touch with your ex through visualization. Photographs are one of the best ways to visualize. So, the first thing to do is to gather together however many photos you still have from happier times together. The engagement party. The wedding. The honeymoon. The birth of your first child. The birth of your second child, etc. Holidays. Wedding anniversaries. Let's hope that you still have as many of these sort of photographs as possible. I know that lots of people throw them away when they split up, and that's a real shame. Once these photos are selected and displayed, you're ready to move on to the most exciting and challenging part of the process. Fresh pickings. This is when you can start to become creative and use your imagination, as you become private detective and paparazzi photographer all in one. Because it's vital that you begin to generate new photographs if your visualization is to work. By only using old photographs, you will simply visualize the past, what I call remembering. And while this can be enjoyable, it's no substitute for true visualization. So get to work straight away. Take your camera and get snapping. What sort of photographs? All sorts. At home, at work, at play, hanging out the washing, dropping the kids off at school, in the park with the new husband, that sort of thing. Basically, you're trying to build up a solid picture of the kind of life you would like to be having with her yourself. Remember, not to get too close. This kind of project is essentially a covert operation, and secrecy is paramount. Once you've gathered a sufficient amount of photos, it's time to turn detective. If your ex has remarried, you have a great opportunity for visualization through her new wedding photos. Obviously, I'm not saying you should creep into her house while she's out and steal them. That would be madness and also a criminal offence. What I'm suggesting is meticulous research at your local newspaper offices, combing through their collection of wedding day pictures. Once located, cut out the husband's head and insert your own. This will speed the visualization process considerably. Better still, if you're a computer whiz, you can interfere with the photos digitally. The bottom line is this. There's very little that you can't achieve through visualization. If your dream is to be back with your wife and children, then simply dream on. So what have we learnt from step 6? Now I know. The friendship needn't die when the love does. Visualization works. The M4 holds many hidden treasures. Remarrying your ex is not impossible. There's a lovely view from the Severn Bridge. End of step 6.
End of disc 3.